At 6:11 a.m., the prototype was still on the ground, and I remembered the sound it made when it killed me. Not the explosion. There had been no explosion. No cinematic ball of fire rolling across a runway. Just a violent mechanical shudder beneath my feet, 3 warning tones colliding in the cockpit, and Captain Daniel Mercer saying my name once before the horizon turned sideways. In my first life, those final 14 seconds were replayed for 11 months by investigators, lawyers, television analysts, and people online who had never touched a flight control system. They called me the engineer who approved a defective aircraft. They displayed my electronic signature beside photographs of the wreckage. They quoted an internal report saying, I had ignored instability in the adaptive trim software. They never showed the version history, proving that the software tested under my authority was not the software installed on the aircraft that morning. By the time I found that history, I had already lost my certification authority, my career, my apartment, and almost every person who had once returned my calls. 3 weeks after I discovered where the replacement build had come from, someone disabled the steering on my car. I remembered the guardrail appearing through rain. I remembered my hands pulling uselessly at the wheel. I remembered cold water entering through a shattered window. Then I opened my eyes again in my own bed, 6 hours before the flight that had destroyed everything. Now I stood inside Hangar 4 of Meridian Aeronautics with both feet on dry concrete and watched the same prototype waiting beneath white maintenance lights. The aircraft was called Aster 1. Its fuselage was pearl gray, its wings unusually narrow, and beneath its skin sat an adaptive stabilization system I had spent 4 years helping design. My name was Dr. Mara Voss. I was 39 years old, Chief Flight Certification Engineer for the Aster program, and according to the release board displayed on the hangar wall, apparently no longer necessary. Beside the aircraft, a temporary stage had been built for investors, journalists, government observers, and representatives from 3 airlines. A giant screen displayed the title of the morning's demonstration, Aster 1, Autonomous Stability for the Next Generation of Regional Flight. Beneath it were 3 names: Adrian Vale, Chief Program Officer, Owen Rusk, Director of Flight Systems, and Elise Hart, Lead Control Architecture Engineer. Mine was missing. I stared at the screen long enough for Owen to notice. He approached carrying 2 coffees and wearing the Navy Flight Program jacket I had given him on our 5th anniversary. In my previous life, I had been engaged to him. In this one, the ring was still on my hand. He offered me a cup and said the communications team had simplified the presentation hierarchy overnight. I asked him what hierarchy required removing the person legally responsible for final engineering release. He gave me the smile that had once convinced me patience and kindness were the same thing. He said no one was removing me from responsibility. They were simply putting younger technical leadership in front of the cameras because investors wanted to see succession depth. I looked across the hangar at Elise. She was 29, brilliant in the particular way that made senior people forgive everything she had not yet learned. She stood beneath the left wing, explaining my control architecture to a group of visitors. I had recruited her 18 months earlier. I had defended her after her first simulator failure. I had spent weekends teaching her why an adaptive system could not be judged by whether it behaved correctly 99 times, because aviation was built around the 100th. In my first life, she had cried at my disciplinary hearing. She had told investigators that she respected me deeply, but had repeatedly warned me that my caution was slowing the program. I had believed she was frightened. I did not know then that she had uploaded the build that killed Daniel Mercer and me. Owen touched my elbow and said we needed to join the release meeting. I moved away before his fingers settled. The gesture surprised him. That gave me my first small pleasure of the morning. The meeting began at 6:20 in the glass conference room overlooking the hangar. Adrian Vale sat at the head of the table. He was 56, silver-haired, perfectly tailored, and capable of turning every deadline into a moral test of someone else's courage. Meridian had spent $800 million on Aster. If the demonstration succeeded, the company expected to announce a strategic investment before the markets closed. In my first life, I had known the demonstration mattered. I had not known exactly how much money was waiting behind it. Elise connected her tablet to the screen and displayed the final software configuration. I recognized the build number immediately. FC7-4-19. My stomach went cold. The certified candidate I had approved for extended simulator evaluation was FC7-4-17. Build 19 contained a predictive trim modification Elise had proposed 6 weeks earlier. I had rejected flight deployment until it completed asymmetric sensor failure testing. In my first life, I had discovered Build 19 only after the crash. This time, I was looking at it before sunrise. I asked Elise when Build 19 had been promoted to flight candidate. She answered that the control group had completed supplemental verification overnight. I asked which control group. She hesitated just long enough. Owen answered for her. His team had reviewed the update with simulation engineering and found no flight-critical regression. I asked for the signed verification package. Adrian said we could circulate documentation after the demonstration. I told him final release documentation existed before flight, not after it. He leaned back and asked whether I had identified an actual defect or merely a process objection. In my old life, that question had worked. It forced me into the role of the anxious engineer who could not prove that something would fail. I had argued for 23 minutes. Adrian had accused me of trying to postpone a milestone because the public presentation no longer centered on me. Owen had privately promised that Build 19 differed only in response smoothing. Eventually, I had signed the release because Daniel was an exceptional test pilot and because I believed I could monitor the system from the telemetry room. Then the aircraft climbed through 6,000 feet. The left air data sensor began oscillating. Build 19 interpreted the disagreement as a persistent pitch error, and the adaptive trim system fought Daniel until Aster 1 entered an unrecoverable dive. This morning, I did not argue. I asked Elise to confirm that Build 19 was installed on the aircraft. She said yes. I asked Owen to confirm that he considered the build safe for crew demonstration flight. He looked at Adrian before answering yes. I asked Adrian whether he intended the demonstration to proceed on schedule. He said absolutely. I opened the certification console. My authorization credential sat beside the final release field. Everyone expected me to enter it. Instead, I selected Withhold Engineering Release. A red banner appeared across the shared screen. Adrian's expression did not change, but the room became silent. I entered the reason. Unverified flight control software configuration, incomplete asymmetric sensor failure validation, configuration discrepancy between certified test candidate and installed aircraft build. Then I attached my earlier rejection memorandum for the predictive trim modification. Owen stared at me and said I was escalating unnecessarily. I told him I was documenting accurately. Adrian asked what would be required to clear the aircraft. I said either reinstall Build 17 or complete the missing validation for Build 19. Elise said reverting would erase 3 weeks of performance gains. I told her performance gains were not certification. She said the system had passed every overnight simulator run. I asked whether they had performed independent left-right sensor disagreement injection above the adaptive threshold. She looked toward Owen. That answered me. Adrian folded his hands and said Meridian had a flight readiness process specifically designed to resolve disagreements between technical leads. He was right. If the chief certification engineer withheld release, the program executive could convene an exception board. That board could transfer release authority to another qualified engineer who accepted the configuration. In my first life, Adrian had threatened to do it. I had been afraid that allowing someone else to sign would make me look weak. So I had kept responsibility and surrendered control. I would not make that mistake twice. I told Adrian to convene the board. Owen looked at me sharply. Elise stopped smiling. Adrian asked whether I understood what I was requesting. I said perfectly. If Meridian believed my objection was excessive, another qualified authority could review the evidence and sign the release using their own credential. No borrowed approval, no verbal understanding, no later reconstruction. Their own name, their own signature, their own decision. For the first time that morning, Adrian looked irritated. Owen asked for 5 minutes alone with me. I refused. I said any discussion affecting flight release belonged in the record. At 6:37, the exception board began. Adrian chaired it. Owen presented the overnight simulator summary. Elise described Build 19 as a minor refinement to predictive response. I uploaded the actual change request, which classified the modification as flight control logic affecting adaptive trim authority. The language was mine because I had written the original risk assessment. Elise's face tightened. She said classifications were often conservative during development. I agreed. That was why validation existed. Adrian asked whether I believed the aircraft would crash. I said I did not know. That was the point. Certification was not prophecy. We did not prove an aircraft safe by demanding that someone predict the exact manner of its failure. We established that known hazards had been tested before placing human beings inside them. Daniel Mercer sat 2 seats away from me. He was 47, a former naval aviator with 15 years of experimental flight experience, and the unnerving calm of a man who had once landed an aircraft after losing half a hydraulic system. In my first life, he had trusted my signature. He had died because of it. Now he asked the question no executive had asked. If Build 17 were restored, would I release the flight? I told him yes, assuming the configuration checksum matched the validated package. Adrian immediately said reverting would delay the demonstration by at least 4 hours because the control surfaces would require recalibration. Daniel shrugged and said 4 hours sounded shorter than forever. I almost laughed. Adrian did not. He reminded Daniel that airline representatives had traveled internationally for the event. Daniel replied that airplanes were famously capable of flying more than once. Elise interrupted. She said the entire purpose of the demonstration was to show the improved adaptive response in Build 19. That sentence mattered. Until then, management had described Build 19 as a minor refinement. Now Elise had admitted the demonstration depended on it. I entered her statement into the meeting record and asked her to confirm it. She realized what I was doing. She said I was twisting her words. I repeated them exactly. Owen told me to stop treating colleagues like hostile witnesses. I looked at him and remembered his testimony after my death. He had told investigators that I alone possessed final authority and that he had trusted my judgment. I remembered reading those words in a report while knowing he had personally urged me to sign. I told him documentation was not hostility. It was memory that could not be intimidated. At 6:52, Adrian called a recess. Owen followed me onto the narrow observation bridge above the hangar. Below us, technicians moved around Aster 1. Beyond the open doors, dawn was turning the runway silver. Owen asked what was happening to me. I said nothing. He said I had spent 4 years fighting to get Aster into the air. And now, on the morning the world was watching, I was sabotaging it over a test matrix. I asked why Build 19 had been installed without my approval. He said because I had become a bottleneck. I asked whether he had authorized it. He said the control team had collective authority over development loads. I reminded him a crew demonstration was not a development bench. His voice lowered. He said Elise needed this flight. I asked why Elise needed anything badly enough to place Daniel inside an unvalidated control loop. He told me I was making it personal. I looked at my engagement ring. In 6 weeks, according to the calendar still hanging in my apartment, I was supposed to marry him beside a lake in Oregon. In my first life, I had died believing his worst betrayal was letting Meridian blame me. I had learned only hours before my second death that his involvement began much earlier. I told him he was right about one thing. I had been making too many things personal. Then I returned to the conference room. At 7:04, Adrian reconvened the board. He announced that Meridian would exercise executive exception authority. Owen Rusk would become temporary engineering release authority for the demonstration. Owen's face changed. Apparently, Adrian had not warned him. For one beautiful second, every abstract argument became concrete. Owen asked whether that was necessary. Adrian said someone qualified needed to take responsibility if I would not. Owen glanced at me. I said nothing. He asked for the simulator package again. Elise pushed her tablet toward him and quietly said the results were clean. He studied the summary for less than 2 minutes. Then he signed. His credential appeared beneath the release statement. Owen Rusk, Temporary Flight Release Authority. Adrian approved the exception. Elise signed configuration responsibility for Build 19. I requested a copy of the complete board record and received it automatically because I remained Chief Certification Engineer even though my release authority for that flight had been transferred. Then I did something nobody expected. I removed myself from the live telemetry command chain. Owen asked what I was doing. I said the engineer who accepted release authority should control operational engineering decisions during the flight. He told me I could still monitor. I said of course I would monitor, but I would not hold an emergency command role without authority over the configuration being flown. Adrian accused me of creating artificial separation. I told him responsibility and authority should never be artificially separated. Daniel watched me from across the table. His expression had become very serious. At 7:19, he asked for a private technical briefing from me as pilot in command. That request could not reasonably be denied. We went to the flight planning room with his co-pilot, Nina Park. I showed them the exact hazard I had identified. Build 19 allowed the predictive trim controller to retain corrective authority longer when sensor disagreement fell into a specific intermediate band. The intention was smoother flight during transient noise. The danger was that a sustained oscillation from one sensor could be interpreted as repeated valid disturbances. Daniel asked what he would feel first. I said probably nothing dramatic. A persistent nose-down trim input that seemed to disappear when manually countered, then returned. Nina asked whether disconnecting adaptive control would stop it. I told her it should, but the simulator case had never been completed under the current build, so I would not promise behavior I had not verified. Daniel asked for an abort threshold. I gave him the one from my rejected test plan. First, unexplained trim recurrence after sensor disagreement, disengage the adaptive system, and terminate demonstration objectives. If control response did not normalize immediately, return to land. Daniel wrote it on his kneeboard. In my first life, I had not given him that warning because I did not know build 19 was installed. That difference alone might save him. Before leaving, he asked whether I wanted him to refuse the flight. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to lock the aircraft inside the hangar, tear out every control computer, and drag him away from the runway. But Daniel had access to the same release objection now. He was pilot in command. He was competent, informed, and legally empowered to refuse. I could not rebuild my life by replacing other people's decisions with my own. I told him I wanted him to make the decision with accurate information. He studied me for a moment and said that sounded like an answer someone gave after learning a very expensive lesson. I said he had no idea. At 7:42, Daniel chose to fly. He imposed his own restrictions. No low-altitude aggressive maneuvering, no automated recovery demonstration, and immediate abort on unexplained trim recurrence. Adrian objected to all three because they weakened the presentation. Daniel told him he was welcome to fly the aircraft himself. The restrictions remained. By then, the investors were arriving. Cameras gathered outside the hangar. Elise changed into a fitted charcoal program jacket and took her place beside a scale model of Aster 1. She looked calm again. Owen looked less calm. He found me near the telemetry room and said there was still time for me to resume an advisory role. I asked whether he wanted my authority or my labor. He said that was unfair. I asked him to explain the distinction. He could not. At 8:03, Aster 1 taxied toward runway 27. I sat at a secondary monitoring console with no command permissions and watched the telemetry populate. Airspeed, altitude, trim position, actuator load, sensor confidence, adaptive gain. Every number was familiar. My hands were cold anyway. The public broadcast showed Daniel and Nina waving from the cockpit before departure. Elise stood beside Adrian in the presentation studio, explaining how the adaptive system reduced pilot workload. Owen was in the primary control station with the flight director. At 8:11, Aster 1 accelerated down the runway. For a moment, memory became so strong that I smelled seawater. Then the aircraft lifted cleanly into the morning sky. I reminded myself that the timeline had already changed. Daniel knew. Nina knew. I had not signed. That did not mean the system was safe. It meant the people inside it were no longer blind. The first 12 minutes were uneventful. Aster climbed through 8,000 feet and completed gentle turns. Build 19 performed beautifully. I could feel the room around me relaxing. Engineers began smiling. Adrian spoke to the cameras about a new era of intelligent flight. Elise answered questions about adaptive prediction, as though the algorithm had been born fully formed inside her head. Owen sent me a message containing only 2 words, "Still worried." I did not answer. At 8:26, the aircraft entered the sensor comparison segment. Nothing in the demonstration plan intentionally induced a failure. It was simply a high bank transition that created the vibration range, where I had seen the left sensor become noisy during ground testing. The first disagreement lasted 0, 18 seconds. The adaptive system filtered it. The second lasted 0, 31. The third reached 0, 47. I leaned closer to the screen. The left sensor began oscillating. Adaptive gain increased. Trim moved nose down by 0, 6 degrees. Daniel corrected manually. Trim returned neutral. 3 seconds later, it moved nose down again. My entire body remembered dying. Daniel's voice came through the engineering channel. He said they had recurrent, uncommanded trim and were terminating demonstration objectives. Nina called out the adaptive disconnect. The public broadcast continued showing an exterior chase aircraft view. Inside telemetry control, nobody moved. Owen told Daniel to hold altitude while engineering reviewed the signal. Daniel answered that he was not asking permission. He disengaged adaptive control. For 2 seconds, trim stabilized. Then the command returned. Nina said the disconnect indication was active, but the secondary controller was still issuing compensation. That had not happened in my first life. Or perhaps it had, and I had died too quickly to understand it. Owen turned toward Elise and asked why the secondary controller remained engaged. She said it should not. The aircraft pitched down 3 degrees. Daniel countered. Actuator load spiked. Adrian entered the control room from the broadcast studio and asked whether the anomaly was visible externally. Nobody answered him. He asked whether the public feed could stay on the chase aircraft. The flight director told him to leave communications clear. Daniel announced that he was executing a return to base. Owen told him engineering recommended cycling the adaptive control computer. I stood up before I could stop myself. Cycling it in flight was exactly what we had attempted in the first timeline. The reboot had restored the controller with maximum retained trim authority. Daniel had followed the instruction because my signature told him the system had been validated. This time he had my warning instead. He refused. He pulled the physical flight control isolation guarded switch that existed for developmental testing. The adaptive system went dark. Aster 1 dropped 80 feet before Daniel recovered manually. Then the telemetry stabilized. Nobody in the control room breathed normally for several seconds. Daniel said they had manual control and were returning. Nina confirmed no structural exceedance. I sat back down because my knees had begun shaking. Elise stared at her console. She whispered that the secondary controller should have dropped offline. Owen asked what changed between build 17 and build 19. She said only predictive persistence. He demanded the source package. She told him it was in the repository. He opened the release manifest. Then his face changed. The checksum on the installed secondary control module did not match the checksum listed in the simulator summary he had signed. Adrian told him not to speculate until the aircraft was safely down. Owen looked at him and said this was not speculation. The airplane was flying a module they had not reviewed. Elise said that was impossible. I watched her hands. She was gripping the edge of the console hard enough to whiten her knuckles. At 8:39, Aster 1 touched down. It bounced once, settled, and rolled beneath emergency vehicles that Daniel had requested before landing. Nobody died. No wreckage burned. No families received phone calls. Yet the moment the aircraft stopped, I knew Meridian's real disaster had begun. The flight director automatically locked the telemetry package because an in-flight control anomaly triggered mandatory preservation. The aircraft configuration was frozen. Software hashes were captured. Cockpit audio, command history, maintenance access, and repository events entered protected status. Adrian could control a press conference. He could not control a checksum. Daniel climbed down the aircraft stairs at 8:47. He did not go to the cameras. He walked directly into the safety office with Nina. At 8:52, Meridian announced that the demonstration had ended early because of a non-critical software irregularity. At 8:55, Daniel filed a pilot safety report describing recurrent uncommanded trim after adaptive disconnect. At 9:02, the Federal observer who had attended the demonstration requested preservation of the complete flight configuration. At 9:07, Adrian canceled the investor briefing. At 9:11, Owen came into the secondary telemetry room and closed the door behind him. He looked as though someone had aged him 10 years during a 30-minute flight. He asked whether I knew the checksum would fail. I told him no. He said I knew something. I told him I knew Build 19 had not completed the testing I required. That was why I refused to certify it. He said the installed module was not the build Elise showed us. I asked what it was. He said he did not know yet. I asked whose signature released it to the aircraft. He looked away. His. I reminded him that was why signatures existed. His face tightened. He said I was enjoying this. I thought about Daniel walking away from the aircraft alive. I told Owen that was the only part I was enjoying. He paced across the room and said we needed to be careful about how the event was described. The company could survive a software anomaly. It might not survive evidence that configuration control had failed before a public demonstration. I asked whether configuration control had failed. He said apparently. Then that was how it should be described. He told me hundreds of jobs depended on Aster, suppliers depended on it, families depended on Meridian. I had heard the same language in another life. Whenever powerful people needed one person to absorb their decisions, they suddenly discovered concern for everyone else's family. Owen opened a document on his tablet. He said we could clarify that I had remained part of the technical decision process, even after withholding formal release. I asked him to read the proposed language. He hesitated. Then he said it stated that I had reviewed the final flight configuration, identified no condition requiring grounding, and voluntarily transferred signature authority because of a disagreement over demonstration scheduling. I almost admired the efficiency. Less than 30 minutes after landing, my objection was already being rewritten into a scheduling dispute. I asked whether he wanted me to sign it. He said it would protect all of us. I asked who had protected Daniel when they loaded an unknown module onto his aircraft. Owen said we did not yet know it was unknown when loaded. I told him that sentence was not helping him. He lowered his voice and reminded me that we were supposed to be married in 6 weeks. There were moments when another life felt distant. That sentence brought it close enough to touch. I remembered sitting beside him after the crash inquiry began. I remembered him holding my hand while telling me Meridian's lawyers would protect us if I cooperated. I remembered signing a joint technical chronology because he said married people did not let institutions divide them. Months later, the chronology became evidence that I had known about Build 19. I looked at the ring on my finger. Then I removed it and placed it on top of his tablet. Owen stared at it. He asked whether I was ending our engagement because of a software discrepancy. I told him I was ending it because an aircraft had barely landed, and his first private request was for me to sign a false description of my role. He said I was being dramatic. I told him drama was what happened on stages. This was documentation. He picked up the ring, but did not put it in his pocket. He asked what had happened to me overnight. I said I had finally become interested in surviving my own decisions. He left without taking the document. I photographed the draft before he closed it. Then I sent the image, my release objection, the exception board record, and the flight telemetry preservation notice to Alina Cho, an aviation attorney I had contacted at 4:38 that morning. In my first life, I had called Alina 11 months too late. This time she answered within 3 minutes. She told me not to sign anything, not to access repositories outside my normal permissions, and not to conduct my own forensic investigation. I said I understood. She told me to preserve every message and keep a contemporaneous log. I told her I had already started. She was silent for a moment, then said I sounded like someone who had done this before. I looked through the glass at Aster 1, surrounded by inspectors. I told her once was enough. At 9:34, the internal safety team discovered that the secondary control module had been uploaded to the aircraft at 2:13 that morning. The credential belonged to Elise Hart. At 9:41, Elise told investigators she had uploaded only the approved Build 19 package. At 9:48, repository logs showed that the module's source branch had been created from a private development fork. not included in the official validation. Environment. At 10:03, Owen called me again. I did not answer. At 10:06, someone attempted to open my archived certification workspace using an expired shared project token. The security system blocked the request and sent me an automated alert. I stared at the screen. In my first life, I had never known such a token existed until investigators produced files supposedly exported from my workspace. Those files contained an altered simulation summary carrying my initials. I had spent months insisting I had never created it. Nobody believed me because the access record pointed to my project identity. Before dawn in this life, I had revoked every legacy session associated with my account. Now the attempt had failed. I forwarded the alert to Information Security and Alina without adding an accusation. 12 minutes later, security identified the terminal. It was inside Owen's systems office. I did not need to trap him. I only needed to stop opening the door for him. By noon, Meridian had suspended all Aster flight testing. Adrian called the decision voluntary. The Federal Observer called it expected. The board called an emergency review. Elise was removed from repository access. Owen was temporarily relieved of release authority. I remained chief certification engineer, but was instructed not to modify Aster records while the investigation proceeded. I agreed immediately. Adrian seemed disappointed by how easily I accepted. He had expected me to fight for access. In my first life, I had fought every restriction because I believed innocence needed constant defense. Now I understood something simpler. Evidence became safer when nobody could claim I had touched it. At 1:22, Daniel found me in the empty cafeteria. He carried a paper cup and moved with the stiff fatigue that came after adrenaline left the body. He sat opposite me and said my abort threshold saved them time. I told him his decision saved the aircraft. He said if he had cycled the computer when Owen suggested it, the outcome might have been different. I knew exactly how different. I told him he had been right not to trust an unverified recovery action. He studied me and asked again whether I had expected the anomaly. I said I expected the possibility. He asked why I looked like I had attended his funeral before takeoff. I looked down at my coffee. Daniel had always been difficult to lie to, so I gave him the only truth I could safely explain. I said I had spent years imagining what happened when engineering uncertainty was treated as inconvenience. That morning, I had finally decided I would rather look cowardly before a flight than correct after a funeral. He nodded slowly. Then he told me something I had not known in my first life. 2 weeks earlier, Adrian had asked him whether Aster could perform a much more aggressive automated recovery maneuver during the demonstration. Daniel had refused. Adrian had said the investment consortium wanted proof that the aircraft could recover from extreme upset with minimal pilot input. I asked which consortium. Daniel said he did not remember the full name, only that the presentation deck called it Northline Mobility Partners. My skin went cold. In my previous life, I had seen the word Northline once, on a document recovered from Owen's laptop shortly before my car went through the guardrail. I had assumed it was an investor. Now the timeline had moved beyond what I remembered, and for the first time that morning, I felt genuinely afraid. Knowing the future was useful only until people began making different choices. After that, I was simply a woman standing inside a machine whose hidden parts were larger than she understood. At 2:10, Alina called. She had checked public corporate records. Northline Mobility Partners was not an aviation investor in the ordinary sense. It was a special purpose acquisition vehicle, incorporated 8 months earlier. Its managing entity shared an address with a technology licensing firm called Vector Bridge Holdings. I recognized that name too. Meridian had discussed using Vector Bridge to commercialize non-aircraft applications of our adaptive control patents. I had opposed the proposal because inventorship and ownership had not been independently reviewed. Alina asked whether I had personally developed any of the core stabilization algorithms. I told her yes, along with a university research team and 2 engineers who had since left Meridian. She asked whether Owen had access to my unpublished notebooks. I said he had access to some through our shared home office, though not officially through Meridian. She asked whether we had a prenuptial agreement. The question seemed absurd until I remembered the message I had read hours before dying in my first life. Owen had written to someone that After the wedding, cleaning up ownership would become easier. At the time, I thought he meant stock options. Now, I was no longer sure. I told Alina the wedding had been canceled approximately 4 hours earlier. She said that might turn out to be the most efficient legal action I took all day. At 3:06, the safety review reconvened. This time, Adrian was not chair. Meridian's board had appointed an outside aviation investigator named Priya Raman to lead the inquiry. She began by stating that the purpose was not to produce a narrative acceptable to investors. It was to determine what configuration flew, how it reached the aircraft, who knew, and whether the crew received accurate information. Adrian's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Priya displayed the software lineage. Build 19 primary controller matched the package Elise presented. The secondary module did not. It contained an experimental persistence routine called Continuity Assist. I knew the routine. I had written an early mathematical prototype 3 years earlier and abandoned it because it could maintain corrective authority across conflicting sensor states longer than I considered safe. The code had never been approved for aircraft implementation. Priya asked who had access to the prototype. I said the research archive, theoretically restricted to the original controls group. She displayed the source header. My name appeared as original author. Then beneath it was a modification history from 3 months earlier. Elise Hart, Owen Rusk, 2 names, not mine. Adrian immediately asked whether my authorship meant the underlying algorithm had originated under my authority. I saw the shape of the future he wanted. It was the same shape as before. If the experimental module became indefensible, they would trace it backward until it touched me. I told Priya the prototype had been a research artifact, not flight software, and that my archive notes explicitly prohibited deployment without a redesigned sensor confidence gate. She asked whether those notes were preserved. I said they should be. Adrian said should was not evidence. Priya agreed. Then she opened the archive snapshot, automatically preserved when the investigation lock began. My original note appeared beside the prototype. Do not deploy in crewed system. Unresolved authority retention under conflicting sensor inputs. For the first time all day, Adrian had nothing to say. Elise said she had believed later testing resolved the issue. Priya asked for that testing. Elise said Owen had it. Owen said the control team had run internal simulations. Priya asked whether those simulations used the exact secondary module installed on Aster 1. Silence. She repeated the question. Owen finally said he did not know. Priya asked how he could have signed flight release without knowing. He said the release manifest presented to him showed a validated package. She asked who prepared the manifest. Elise said configuration engineering. Configuration engineering denied it. The metadata identified Elise's workstation. Elise looked at Adrian. Adrian looked at Owen. Nobody looked at me. The alliances were beginning to fracture because responsibility had become too heavy to share. At 4:18, Priya produced the cockpit command sequence. Daniel's adaptive disconnect had correctly disengaged the primary controller. The experimental secondary module had ignored the state transition for 4.7 seconds and continued issuing trim commands. Had Daniel followed Owen's instruction to reboot the system, the module would have restarted with its retained correction value preserved. Priya did not speculate about whether the aircraft would have crashed. She did not need to. Daniel asked one question. Had that reboot behavior ever been tested in flight configuration? No one could produce evidence that it had. The room went silent. I remembered the horizon rotating. I remembered Daniel saying my name. In this life, he sat 3 chairs away from me, alive and furious. That was enough. The meeting ended after sunset. I returned home to an apartment filled with evidence of a wedding that would never happen. Fabric samples sat on the dining table. Guest lists were pinned to a corkboard. Owen's shoes were beside the door. His books filled half the shelves. I did not throw anything. Rage was not an inventory system. I photographed the shared office exactly as it was, then followed Alina's instructions and arranged for an independent service to collect Owen's belongings later. At 9:17, my phone rang from an unknown number. I answered. Elise said my name. Her voice sounded small. She asked whether we could meet. I said no. She said she needed me to understand that the module was never supposed to reach the aircraft. I told her to speak with investigators. She said Adrian would destroy her. I asked why Adrian mattered, if she had acted independently. She became quiet. Then she said I knew how these programs worked. Senior people asked for results without putting dangerous instructions in writing. Younger engineers learned to interpret what success required. I told her that might explain pressure. It did not explain falsifying a manifest. She said she had not falsified anything. I reminded her metadata existed. She said metadata could be misleading. I almost smiled. In my first life, those exact words had been used against me. I told her again to speak with investigators. She asked whether I hated her. I said hatred was not relevant to whether she put experimental software on a crewed aircraft. She started crying. I listened without comforting her. Eventually, she said Owen told her I would never allow Aster to succeed while I controlled certification. I asked whether Owen told her to install continuity assist. She stopped crying. The silence lasted 4 seconds. Then the call ended. I wrote down the exact exchange and sent the note to Alina. At 10:02, Information Security reported another attempt to access the research archive. This time, the credential belonged to Adrian's executive technical account. The request was blocked because the archive was under investigation hold. At 10:15, Meridian's board placed Adrian on temporary administrative leave. At 10:31, Northline Mobility Partners withdrew its scheduled investment announcement. At 10:44, a financial reporter published an article saying Meridian's flagship demonstration had exposed a potentially serious flight control defect. The article named no engineer. That should have comforted me. Instead, I knew the story had only reached its first layer. In my previous life, the crash had been so catastrophic that everyone focused on the wreckage. It had hidden the financial machinery behind the flight. By saving the aircraft, we had preserved something more dangerous than debris. We had preserved the people who could talk. The next morning, Owen requested permission to enter the apartment. Elena advised that he could collect personal belongings with a neutral witness present. He arrived at 8:30 wearing the same clothes from the previous day. He looked exhausted. I stood in the living room while the building manager remained near the door. Owen packed silently for 10 minutes before asking whether I had told investigators about Northline. I had not told him I knew the name. I asked why he thought I had. He froze with a stack of shirts in his hands. Then he said Daniel had probably mentioned it. I asked what Northline wanted from Aster. He said investment. I asked what Vector Bridge wanted. His face changed. There are expressions too small to be called confessions, but too honest to be mistakes. That was one. He asked who had spoken to me. I told him public records were surprisingly conversational. He sat on the edge of the sofa. Then he said the licensing structure was not illegal. Meridian wanted to separate certain control technologies from the aircraft program so they could be commercialized in shipping, drones, and industrial robotics. I asked who owned those technologies. He said Meridian. I told him inventorship was not the same as employment ownership, and that several core algorithms originated under a university agreement with reserved rights. He said lawyers were handling it. I asked why Northline's investment depended on the demonstration. He said because successful flight validation increased the value of the licensing portfolio. There it was. The demonstration had never been merely a demonstration. It was a valuation event. I asked whether continuity assist was included in that portfolio. He looked at the floor. I asked again. Yes. I asked whether my abandoned research prototype had been presented to investors as functioning Aster technology. He said not exactly. I asked what phrase he preferred. He said the investor deck described it as demonstrated adaptive persistence architecture. I laughed once. It was the first genuinely involuntary laugh I had made since waking in my second life. Demonstrated. They needed the flight to transform a dangerous research concept into an apparently proven commercial asset. That was why reverting to Build 17 had been unacceptable. Build 17 could fly safely, but it could not produce the behavior investors had been promised. I asked whether Elise knew. He said she knew Northline wanted the performance improvement. I asked whether she knew about Vector Bridge. He said probably not all of it. I asked whether he did. He looked at me. Yes. I asked what happened after our wedding. He stood up. The building manager glanced toward us. Owen told me not to turn everything into conspiracy. I repeated the question. He said our marriage had nothing to do with the flight. I told him I had not asked about the flight. I asked what happened to my intellectual property after our wedding. He stared at me for so long that I knew I had reached the place he feared. Finally, he said Meridian's lawyers had raised concerns about ownership claims connected to research I performed before joining the company, because some notebooks and prototype work had continued during our relationship. The licensing team believed a marital property agreement could simplify representations to investors. I felt something colder than anger. I asked whether he intended to ask me to sign such an agreement. He said after the wedding, when things were calmer. I asked whether he had already told Northline I would. He did not answer. That was answer enough. I told him to take his belongings and leave. He said, Mara, please. I had heard him say my name in love, irritation, fear, and testimony. None of those versions mattered anymore. I told him the next conversation about Meridian, Northline, Vector Bridge, my research, or the flight would happen through counsel or investigators. He looked as though he wanted to say something devastating. Instead, he packed his shirts. At 11:40, Alina called with news that changed the scale of everything. Northline was not merely an outside investor. Two of its beneficial owners were trusts connected to Adrian Vale and a Meridian board member named Charles Beck. Vector Bridge had granted Owen an option for equity that would vest after completion of the Astor licensing transaction. Elise had been promised a director-level research position if the demonstration met performance targets. I asked how Alina had obtained the information. She said Northline's withdrawal had triggered a dispute with one of its financing partners, and corporate documents were moving rapidly into lawyers' hands. We still needed verified records before making accusations. I agreed. In my first life, I would have wanted to expose everything immediately. Now, I understood the difference between knowing and proving. At 1:00, federal aviation investigators formally opened an inquiry into the unauthorized flight control configuration. At 1:20, Meridian's audit committee opened a separate investigation into related party transactions. At 2:05, the university that had participated in my early research requested preservation of all intellectual property records. At 3:12, Vector Bridge's website disappeared. At 3:20, Alina captured the archived corporate pages through an independent preservation service. Nobody had asked Vector Bridge to disappear. Again, I did not need to create evidence. I needed to stop standing between people and their instincts. 2 days later, Elise asked through her attorney for a formal proffer interview. She had decided to cooperate. Her story was uglier and more ordinary than I expected. Adrian had spent months telling the Astor team that conventional certification thinking would allow larger competitors to overtake Meridian. Owen had translated those speeches into technical pressure. Every time Elise produced a more aggressive control response, she received praise, access, travel, and visibility. Every time I required additional validation, Owen told her I was protecting my authority. Northline representatives had attended private simulator demonstrations and repeatedly asked when continuity assist would be shown in flight. Elise had known the routine came from my abandoned research. Owen told her my objections were historical and personal, not technical. She believed him because believing him made her important. The night before the demonstration, the validated Build 19 package failed to produce the persistence metric promised to investors. At 1:36 a.m., Owen told Elise they needed the research module for one flight. She asked about my approval. Owen said Adrian had executive authority and that I would sign once I saw the overnight results. At 2:13, Elise loaded the module. At 3:05, she generated a simulator run using a modified environment where sensor disagreement never entered the dangerous intermediate band. At 3:42, Owen reviewed the summary. At 4:10, Adrian received a message saying performance targets were restored. At 6:20, they walked into the release meeting expecting me to do what I had apparently done in another life: argue, protest, and eventually sign. Elise's attorney asked whether I wanted to respond. I said no. Elise looked at me across the table and said she had thought I would save the flight if anything went wrong. The sentence struck harder than an apology. I asked what she meant. She said everyone knew. I could diagnose Aster faster than anyone. Even if the software behaved strangely, I would be in telemetry. I would tell them what to do. I understood then why my withdrawal from command authority had frightened them so much. They had not merely expected my signature. They had expected my competence to remain available after they ignored my judgment. They wanted to borrow my credibility before failure and my skill after it. In my first life, I had given them both. This time, Daniel had survived because he had been warned before takeoff, and because he refused an unsafe recovery instruction. Elise began crying again. She said she never wanted anyone to die. I believed her. Most catastrophic decisions were not made by people hoping for funerals. They were made by people convinced consequences would be absorbed by someone more careful. I told her intent would matter to the people judging her, but it did not change what she had done. She asked whether I could ever forgive her. I told her forgiveness was not a certification standard. She almost smiled despite herself. Then she looked down. The investigation continued for 7 weeks. Every week exposed another layer. Meridian's internal emails showed Adrian repeatedly linking the demonstration to Northline's valuation deadline. Owen's messages showed that he had discussed my research ownership with Vector Bridge months before proposing to me. That discovery hurt more than I expected. We had been together for 6 years. I had believed the proposal belonged to us. Perhaps some part of it had. Human motives rarely arrived pure enough to label. He may have loved me and calculated around me at the same time. That did not make the calculation less real. A draft marital property agreement, recovered from his legal folder, would have assigned broad commercialization rights for jointly developed technical concepts to a holding entity in which he possessed an undisclosed future interest. My signature line was blank. I had never seen the document. Another file contained a post-wedding schedule for transferring selected Aster patents to Vector Bridge. My name appeared beside 3 patents as an inventorship risk to be resolved. Not engineer, not partner, risk. I stared at that word for a long time. Then I closed the file. Anger was useful only when it sharpened decisions. I had no intention of letting it write mine. Adrian resigned before the audit committee completed its report. He described his departure as necessary to prevent distraction. The board member connected to Northline resigned 2 days later. Owen was terminated for unauthorized configuration activity, false release documentation, and conflict of interest violations. His engineering license entered formal review. Elise lost her flight test authorization and was dismissed from Meridian because she cooperated early and provided the original messages. Investigators treated her differently from Owen and Adrian, though her career in crewed flight control certification was effectively over. She later issued a statement accepting responsibility for loading the unauthorized module. It contained no accusation against me. I did not celebrate. Consequence looked much less satisfying from nearby than people imagined. Daniel returned to flight after the aircraft was reverted to a verified configuration and independently inspected. The first time I saw him climb into a cockpit again, my hands shook. He noticed. He asked whether I wanted him to cancel. I told him absolutely not. He said good, because he had already checked the software checksum himself. Nina laughed from the other seat. I did too. Aster 1 eventually flew again, but not as the aircraft Adrian had promised investors. Continuity assist was removed entirely. The adaptive system returned to a narrower authority envelope. Performance figures became less impressive. Safety margins became more honest. Airlines remained interested. It turned out customers preferred an aircraft that landed. Meridian's board offered me Adrian's former program authority on an interim basis. I declined. Then they offered me expanded certification control, direct reporting to the board, retention compensation, and a public statement crediting my actions with preventing a potentially catastrophic event. I declined that too. The chair asked what else I wanted. I told her independent configuration oversight, protected descent authority for flight test engineers, mandatory separation between investor milestones and safety release chains, and external inventorship review before any research entered a licensing vehicle. She said those changes could be negotiated. I told her my employment could not. I had spent 4 years believing Aster was my life's work. Then I died once for it, and nearly watched Daniel die a second time. That was enough ownership for one career. The university research group invited me back as director of a new flight safety laboratory, jointly funded by 3 manufacturers, but governed independently from all of them. I accepted on one condition. No sponsor could remove an adverse test result from publication or condition funding on a demonstration outcome. They agreed. Daniel joined the advisory board. Nina helped design pilot-in-the-loop validation. 2 Meridian engineers followed me 6 months later. I did not recruit them. They said they wanted to work somewhere that treating uncertainty seriously was not considered a failure of enthusiasm. Owen contacted me once after his licensing hearing. His message contained no request for reconciliation. He said he finally understood why I had asked him to put his name on the release. He wrote that for years, he had believed responsibility was something organizations distributed after outcomes were known. That morning, I had forced him to accept it before the outcome. He said he hated me for it at first. Then he realized that was exactly what engineering signatures were supposed to mean. I did not answer. Some lessons did not require an audience. Elise wrote 2 years later. She had left aviation and was working on industrial control systems under supervision. She said she still dreamed about the moment Aster pitched down. She said the worst part was not remembering the warning alarms. It was remembering that when I withheld release. Her first feeling had been anger because I was standing between her and the future she thought she deserved. She asked whether ambition always became dangerous when mixed with fear. I answered that one. I told her no. Ambition became dangerous when people started treating other human beings as insurance against its consequences. She thanked me. That was the last message we exchanged. 3 years after the demonstration, I stood behind a group of graduate engineers watching a small experimental aircraft prepare for a taxi test. There were no journalists, no investor stage, no dramatic countdown. A student named Leo was reviewing telemetry when he noticed a tiny disagreement between 2 actuator position sensors. The difference was well within operational tolerance. The schedule said we had 20 minutes of runway access remaining. A sponsor representative was visiting. Every instinct learned in ambitious organizations would have told a young engineer not to become the person who delayed everyone over a number that was probably meaningless. Leo raised his hand anyway. He said he wanted to stop the test and inspect the sensor. The room became quiet for half a second. Then the test director said, "Good catch. Hold the aircraft." Nobody sighed. Nobody asked whether he was sure enough to justify the inconvenience. Nobody reminded him who was watching. The aircraft stopped. Maintenance found a connector that had not fully seated. It probably would not have caused an accident. Probably. We replaced it and lost the runway slot. The test moved to the next morning. Nothing dramatic happened. No investigation began. No careers ended. No one became famous. I walked home that evening through cold autumn rain and realized that was the ending I had wanted without knowing how to name it. In my first life, I thought justice meant proving I had not killed Daniel Mercer. Later, I thought it meant exposing Owen, Elise, Adrian, and the money hidden behind Aster. For a while, I thought surviving them was enough. It was not. Survival still allowed the people who hurt you to define the shape of your life. The real victory was much quieter. Daniel was alive. I was alive. A young engineer had stopped an aircraft because a sensor reading bothered him, and nobody made him pay for being careful. There was no applause when he did it. There should not have been. Safety was not supposed to require courage every single time. Sometimes, when I wake before dawn, I still remember the other runway. I remember warning tones. I remember Daniel saying my name. I remember rain striking the windshield of a car that would not turn. I cannot prove that life existed anywhere except inside me. I no longer need to. It gave me one piece of knowledge worth carrying into this one. People who intend to use you as their safety net will call your boundaries betrayal. They will say you abandoned the team when you refuse to sign. They will say you are selfish when you make them carry their own decisions. They will accuse you of setting a trap when all you did was stop removing the consequences from their path. I used to believe protecting people meant catching them before they fell. Now I know there are moments when the only honest thing you can do is move aside. Document the warning, protect the innocent, and let every adult put their own name beneath the choice they insist is safe. On the morning Aster 1 nearly fell out of the sky, I did not defeat anyone. I did not sabotage a flight. I did not predict every move. I simply refused to sign a future I knew was built on a lie. For the first time in either of my lives, everyone else had to sign their own.